The night was cold and endless. Snow fell from the black sky in heavy sheets. The alien mother walked slowly through the storm. Her arms were wrapped around her child. She tried to cover the small body with what little cloth they had, but the wind cut through the fabric like knives. The ground was frozen, sharp with broken ice. Each step was painful, but she could not stop. If she stopped, her child would die. Her name was Sail, and her daughter was Lyra. They had been running for many days. Raiders had burned their village, destroyed their homes. Everything they once had was gone. Sail carried nothing but the clothes on her back, and the hope that somewhere ahead there was shelter. Her body was weak, but her spirit held firm, for she had promised Lyra that she would never give up. The little girl's voice was faint against the storm. "Mother, I am hungry," she whispered. Sail's heart twisted with pain. She had no food left to give. The last piece of dried root was gone 2 days ago. She remembered how Lyra chewed it slowly, trying to make it last. Now, her daughter's stomach was empty. Her lips were pale, and her eyes were heavy with sleep. Sail feared that if Lyra closed her eyes now, she might never open them again. The storm grew worse. Snow struck their faces like shards of glass. Sail bent forward, using her body as a shield for her child. Her feet bled in the cold. Her hands shook violently. Still she walked. Every step was a battle. Every breath burned her chest. But the thought of losing Lyra gave her strength. She whispered soft words into the child's ear. "Stay with me, little one. Stay awake. We are almost there." But in truth, she did not know where there was. The land around them was empty, white, and cruel. No trees, no houses, no firelight in the distance. Only endless snow and silence. Sail wondered if the universe had abandoned them. Her kind had once believed in stars that guided lost souls. Now the sky was empty, hidden by clouds, and all she could do was walk blindly into the storm. Her mind drifted back to the night of the attack. The sky had been full of fire as raiders descended. Their machines tore through the ground. Flames spread through the village. Screams echoed in the night. She remembered grabbing Lyra and running into the woods. Her mate had stayed behind to fight. She never saw him again. The memory burned inside her. But grief could not be her weakness now. She had to keep moving for her child. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time meant nothing in the storm. Sail's legs grew heavy, her vision blurred. The world tilted with every step. Her knees buckled, and she nearly fell. But Lyra's small hand clutched her tightly. "Don't fall, Mother," the girl whispered. That weak voice was enough to pull her back. With tears freezing on her cheeks, Sail forced herself up. One more step, then another. She would not fall, not yet. At last, through the swirling snow, something flickered, a dim light far in the distance. Sail's heart leapt. It might be fire or a lamp, or maybe only her imagination. But it was hope. She staggered forward, focusing on that glow. Her legs felt like stone, her back screamed with pain. Yet the light pulled her onward. Lyra saw it too, her tired eyes shining faintly. "Mother, there is something ahead," she said. Sail kissed her daughter's forehead. "Yes, my love. Hold on, we are not finished yet." The closer they came, the brighter the light grew. It shimmered through the storm like a star fallen to earth. Sail's breath quickened. Her heart pounded, but fear gnawed at her as well. What if the light was danger? What if humans lived there? Humans were known to hate her kind. They might drive her away. They might harm Lyra. Still, she had no choice. Her child's life was worth any risk. Finally, she reached the edge of tall wall. Metal plates welded together, strong against the storm. The light shone from inside the wall. It was real. It was a settlement. Sail's knees gave way. She fell to the ground before the great gate, her arms still clutching Lyra tightly. The girl whimpered softly. Sail pressed her forehead against the frozen ground, and with the last of her strength, she lifted her hand and knocked. The sound echoed through the storm. Once, twice, 3 times, then silence. Her vision blurred. Darkness edged her eyes. But faintly, She heard footsteps on the other side. Someone was coming. And with that small hope, Sail let herself collapse in the snow, still holding her child close. The sound of boots echoed on the other side of the gate. Sail tightened her hold on Lyra, her heart racing. The heavy door creaked, and a narrow gap opened. A man stood there, wrapped in a thick coat, a rifle slung across his chest. His breath came out in clouds of steam as he frowned at them. At first, his eyes were sharp with suspicion, but then he saw the child in Sail's arms, shivering and weak. For a long moment, he said nothing, only studying them through the storm. Sail bowed her head, her voice trembling. "Please, she is dying. Let us in," she begged. The man's jaw tightened. He had lived here for years, surviving on his own rules. And one of those rules was clear: no outsiders. Humans distrusted aliens, for good reason, or so people believed. But something in his chest twisted as he looked at the mother and child. He remembered nights when he had lost everything. He remembered silence where laughter once lived. And against his better judgment, he pushed the gate open wider. "Get inside before you freeze," he muttered. His voice was rough, but not without mercy. Sail stumbled inside, her legs barely carrying her. Warmth rushed against her face. The air smelled of smoke and fire. Lyra stirred, whispering a weak "thank you." The human shut the gate firmly, checking the lock. Then he turned back to them, still wary. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This settlement doesn't welcome your kind." Sail lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I don't ask for welcome, only for her life." He sighed, rubbing his temple. There was danger in kindness, he knew. If others found out, they would judge him, maybe worse. But he could not send them back into the storm. He guided them to a small cabin, his own home. Inside, the fire burned in the hearth, glowing against the walls. Sail sank to the floor, clutching Lyra close to the heat. Her body trembled, but her eyes filled with relief. The man set bread and water on the table. "Eat," he said, "then rest. We will speak later." The bread was coarse, the water cold. But to Sail and Lyra, it was life itself. The child ate slowly, smiling faintly. Sail whispered blessings under her breath. The human watched them with guarded eyes. He had not spoken his name yet, but in his heart, he already knew this choice would change everything. Outside, snow still fell, blanketing the settlement in silence. But within that small cabin, a fragile spark of hope flickered. It was a dangerous hope, one that could draw trouble. Yet it was stronger than the storm. For the first time in many days, Sail believed tomorrow might exist. And the human, though he would not admit it aloud, felt his home no longer empty. The fire burned low in the cabin. Sail sat close to it, wrapping Lyra in a blanket the human had given. The child's small body shook less now, her cheeks slowly warming. Sail touched her daughter's forehead with relief, whispering thanks. The human sat in the corner, his rifle leaning against the wall. His eyes never left them, sharp and cautious. To him, they were strangers, and strangers meant danger. His name was Daniel, though he had not spoken it yet. Years ago, he had lived with a family of his own. A wife, a son, a life filled with laughter. But war and sickness had stolen them away. Now he lived alone, hunting, farming scraps of frozen earth. Every choice he made was for survival. Trust was not a luxury he could afford. Yet tonight, he had broken his own rule. He had opened the gate, and the weight of that decision pressed hard on his chest. Sail knew the tension. She could see it in the way Daniel's hand rested near his weapon. She lowered her eyes, speaking softly. "If you want us gone when the storm ends, we will leave," she said. Her voice was tired but calm. "I only ask you let her live through this night." Daniel's jaw clenched. He hated the weakness in his heart. But when he looked at the child, he saw his son's face. Fragile, innocent, undeserving of pain. Lyra lifted her head, her voice faint. "Are we safe here, Mother?" she asked. The words pierced Daniel deeper than he expected. Safe. The word felt heavy, almost cruel in this broken world. But he could not bring himself to lie. "You are safe for now," he said roughly. The girl smiled weakly and laid her head down again. Sale whispered a quiet thank you, and Daniel turned his gaze back to the fire, hiding the storm inside his mind. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind howled, battering the walls of the settlement. Inside, silence grew thick, broken only by the crackle of flames. Daniel wondered what others would say if they learned of this. The settlement had rules, strict rules. No outsiders, no aliens, no exceptions. If they discovered the truth, there would be questions that could turn into threats. Yet, when he looked again at the fragile mother and child, he knew he would not drive them back into the snow. He rose, placing more wood on the fire. Sale flinched slightly at the sound, then forced herself to relax. Her body was still tense, ready to defend her child, even in exhaustion. Daniel noticed this and sighed. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice quieter now. Sale met his eyes, her own shimmering with fear and gratitude. "Then you are rare among men," she answered. Her words struck him, though he did not show it. At last, Daniel spoke again. "You can stay tonight, but tomorrow we will decide what comes next." It was not a promise, but it was not a rejection either. Sale bowed her head in respect. For her, tomorrow was more than she had dared to hope for. The child slept, her small hand clutching the blanket, and Daniel sat watching them until his own eyes grew heavy. The firelight danced across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to whisper of choices yet to come. The morning came with a pale, gray sky. Snow still drifted lightly outside the window, but inside the cabin, warmth lingered from the fire. Sale opened her eyes slowly, her body aching from exhaustion. Beside her, Lyra still slept, her small face pressed against the blanket. For the first time in many days, the child's breathing was calm. Sale whispered a prayer of thanks, holding her daughter's hand gently. Daniel was already awake, sitting by the table with a piece of bread in his hand. His eyes moved between the fire and the strangers he had allowed into his home. He told himself again that this was temporary, yet his chest felt strangely lighter than it had in years. He watched the little girl's fragile frame and felt a memory stir. His own son, years ago, sleeping under the same roof. That image haunted him, but also warmed him. He closed his eyes briefly, pushing the thought away. When Sale tried to rise, her knees shook. Her body was too weak. Daniel noticed and stood. "Sit," he said firmly. "You are no use to her if you fall." His voice was rough, but carried an edge of concern. Sale nodded quietly and sat again. Daniel set a small bowl of soup in front of her. It was thin, made from little more than water and root. But to Sale it was a gift beyond measure. She ate slowly, then gave the rest to Lyra when the child woke. The girl smiled faintly, whispering a tired thank you. Daniel studied the way they shared food. It reminded him of how his wife had once saved the last bite for their son. He looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the flood of memory. Still, his voice softened when he spoke. "You'll need strength if you plan to survive here." Sale lowered her gaze. "I only plan to survive long enough for her to live." The words struck him harder than he expected. This woman was broken, but her will was made of steel. He respected that even as he feared what trouble it could bring. The day moved slowly. Sale tried to help by sweeping the floor and tending the fire. Daniel watched, unsure whether to allow it. But when he saw her hands shaking with effort, he finally said, "You don't have to prove yourself here. Rest." Still, she refused to stay idle. "I must do something," she answered softly. "If I only take, then I am nothing." Daniel had no reply to that. He understood too well what it meant to feel useless. In silence, he allowed her to continue. Outside, the settlement stirred. Men walked between the cabins. Women gathered wood. Children carried buckets. Daniel knew eyes would eventually turn toward him, and questions would rise. No one had seen the alien mother and child enter. But secrets did not last long in a place this small. He thought about what he would say if someone asked. No excuse came to mind. The weight of that truth pressed against him as hard as the winter air. That evening, Daniel sat with his rifle across his lap. He cleaned it slowly, the ritual steadying his nerves. Sale sat opposite him, sewing a tear in Lyra's blanket with trembling fingers. For a while, they worked in silence. Finally, Daniel broke it. "If the others find out, they may not be kind," he warned. Sale looked at him, her eyes tired but unafraid. "Then we will go, if that is what you wish," she said. Daniel studied her face. It carried scars of hardship, but also something unyielding. He shook his head. "You won't last another night out there, so for now you stay." The words were plain, but they carried weight. Sale bowed her head, whispering thanks. Daniel turned his eyes back to the fire. He told himself again this was only temporary. Yet deep down, he already knew it was not. Something had shifted in his life, and no matter how much he resisted it, the presence of the alien mother and child had begun to change the silence of his world. The storm had passed, leaving the settlement wrapped in a dull gray silence. Smoke rose from chimneys, and footsteps echoed on frozen ground. For a brief moment, life seemed calm again. But calm was fragile, and Daniel knew it would not last. That morning, as he chopped wood outside his cabin, two men passed by. They nodded to him, but glanced toward his door with sharp eyes. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Had they noticed something? Had they seen movement inside? He forced a casual smile and went back to work. But the unease gnawed at him like hunger. Inside, Sale kept Lyra close to the fire. The girl's color had returned slightly, but her strength was not yet whole. She hummed a soft song from her people, a lullaby meant to chase away fear. The tune was gentle, but it carried through the wooden walls. And outside, a woman paused, frowning at the strange sound. Rumors were quick in a place like this, and whispers spread faster than the wind. By evening, Daniel heard voices outside. He stood at the window, his jaw tightening. A group of neighbors gathered near the gate, muttering in low tones. Though the words were unclear, the tone was sharp. Suspicion was growing. He cursed under his breath. This was exactly what he had feared. That night, there was a knock at his door. Sale froze, clutching Lyra's hand. Daniel set his rifle on the table before answering. Three men stood outside, their expressions hard. "Daniel," one of them said, "we've heard things." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What kind of things?" The man crossed his arms. "Voices in your house, sounds that don't belong. You keeping someone in there." The air between them turned cold, sharper than the frost. Daniel forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "I live alone. You know that," he replied. But the men did not look convinced. One leaned forward, trying to peer past him. Daniel shifted his body to block the view. "You doubt me now," he said, his tone sharp. "We're just making sure," the man answered. "These are hard times. We can't afford risks." He slammed the door shut before the conversation could go further. His hand shook slightly, though his face stayed hard. Inside, Sale looked at him with wide eyes. "They will not stop, will they?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, they won't," he admitted. He sat heavily by the fire, staring at the flames. "They fear anything different, anything they can't control." Sale lowered her gaze, pressing Lyra against her chest. "I have seen this before," she murmured. "Fear grows like a shadow, and soon it becomes hate." The following days grew tense. Daniel tried to act normal, chopping wood, hunting, speaking briefly to others. But he felt eyes on him everywhere he went. Inside, Sale kept quiet, moving softly so no sound escaped the walls. Lyra tried to whisper when she played, but even her laughter felt dangerous. Every knock, every sound outside the cabin set their hearts racing. One night, as the wind howled again, angry voices rose outside. Daniel grabbed his rifle and stood at the door. Sale pulled Lyra into her arms, rocking her softly. The crowd shouted accusations, demanding answers. "You hide them, don't you? We heard it, we know." Their words struck like stones. Daniel's face turned hard as steel. He opened the door just enough to face them. "You have no proof," he said coldly. The leader sneered. "Proof or not, we don't want outsiders here. Not after what's happened before." The tension hung heavy in the air. Daniel's finger brushed the edge of his rifle. He could end this with fear, with force. But deep inside, he knew that would only make things worse. He closed the door again, his heart pounding. The voices outside lingered for a time, then slowly faded into the night. But the message was clear. The settlement no longer trusted him, and danger was closing in like the snow itself. Sale's eyes shone with worry. "Why do you risk yourself for us?" she asked softly. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, "Because once someone should have done the same for me, but no one did." He turned back to the fire, his hands clenched. And in that silence, Sale realized the man who had saved them was also saving himself. The night was restless. Daniel sat by the window, his rifle across his lap. The fire burned low, casting faint light across the cabin. Outside, snow drifted softly, but the silence felt heavy. Too heavy. He knew it was only the calm before another storm. Not of weather, but of people. Sale sat in the corner, holding Lyra close. The child slept, though her small body trembled even in dreams. Sale's eyes never left Daniel. She could see the weight pressing on him. This man had risked everything for them, and now the burden of that choice was ready to crush him. The first sound came as footsteps, many of them, crunching over the frozen ground. Daniel rose slowly, his muscles tense. The knock at the door was not gentle. It was sharp, demanding. "Daniel," a voice called, "open up." Lyra stirred at the noise, whimpering softly. Sale pressed her hand over her child's ear, whispering comfort. Daniel moved to the door, his rifle still in his hand. When he opened it, a crowd stood outside. Torches lit the night, their flames dancing in the wind. Men and women from the settlement, their faces hard. The leader stepped forward. "You brought outsiders here," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "You broke our rules. You endangered us all." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "They are only a mother and child," he said. "They are no threat." The crowd muttered angrily. "Today it's one. Tomorrow it's many," someone shouted. "Aliens bring death. We won't suffer for your weakness," another added. Daniel lifted his rifle, not pointing it but holding it where all could see. The crowd fell quiet for a moment. "I won't let you touch them," Daniel said firmly. "They're under my roof, and while they are here, they're under my protection." The leader sneered. "You turn against your own kind for them." Daniel's voice hardened. "I'm not turning against anyone, but I won't stand by while you let fear make you cruel." The words struck deep. The crowd shifted uneasily, but anger still burned in many eyes. The leader stepped closer. "You can't keep this secret forever, Daniel. Sooner or later, someone will pay for this mistake." Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle. "If there is a price, I'll be the one to pay it," he said. "But I won't let a child freeze in the snow just to keep you all comfortable." For a long moment, silence hung in the air. The wind blew hard, scattering sparks from the torches. Finally, one of the younger men lowered his head. "Maybe he's right," he muttered. Others frowned. Some hesitated. The leader glared but saw his control slipping. With a sharp motion, he turned. "This isn't finished," he said, and the crowd slowly began to break apart. One by one, the torches vanished into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind and Daniel's heavy breathing. He shut the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Sale looked at him, her eyes shining with relief and fear. "You stood for us," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I stood for what was right," he replied. His voice was low but steady. Lyra crawled to him, clutching his coat with small hands. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel knelt down, resting his hand gently on her hair. "You're safe as long as I'm here," he promised. The cabin grew quiet again, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of his words, a promise that bound them together. Daniel knew the danger was not gone, but in that moment, he also knew he had made his choice, not out of pity, but out of something stronger. And though the path ahead was uncertain, he would face it for them, for himself, and for the chance of hope in a world that had forgotten it. The storm had passed again, leaving the land coated in white silence. Days slipped by slowly, each one carrying the weight of Daniel's choice. The settlement grew quieter toward him, whispers following wherever he walked. But no one came to his door again, not yet. Inside the cabin, life began to change. Sail grew stronger with every day, her steps steadier, her voice no longer filled only with fear. She helped keep the fire burning, cleaned the space, mended what little they had. Her hands were tired hands, but they carried purpose. Lyra's laughter, soft at first, began to fill the room. She played with scraps of wood, building little figures. Her eyes brighter now, her cheeks touched with color. It was the sound Daniel had not heard in years, and it made the cabin feel less like a shelter and more like a home. One morning, Daniel returned from chopping wood to find Lyra waiting at the door. She smiled shyly and offered him a tiny carving she had made. A crude figure, shaped like a man holding a stick. Daniel took it carefully, his rough fingers trembling. "For you," she whispered, her voice uncertain. He swallowed hard, the memory of his own son rising unbidden. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice breaking for the first time in years. The girl grinned, and Sail watched quietly, her eyes glistening. But beyond the walls of the cabin, the danger still lived. The settlement had not forgotten, only waited. Daniel knew this, and yet he also knew something had shifted. The night of the confrontation had planted doubt among them. Some had begun to question the old fear. If a hardened man like Daniel could choose compassion, why couldn't they? Whispers of change were fragile, but even fragile things could grow. One evening, as the fire burned low, Sail sat beside Daniel. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You gave us more than food, more than shelter," she said. "You gave us hope." Daniel shook his head, staring into the flames. "No, you gave me hope," he answered. "For years I lived with nothing but silence, and now there is life again." Sail's eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in tomorrow. The days blended into weeks. The settlement never welcomed them openly, but neither did it drive them out. Some neighbors began leaving small gifts of food near the gate. A loaf of bread, a bundle of wood, a quiet gesture of understanding. Others only turned their heads away, unwilling to face their own doubt. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. One night, as the stars returned to the sky, Lyra pointed upward with wide eyes. "Mother, look," she said, "the lights are back." Sail followed her gaze, her breath catching. The clouds had parted, and the stars shone clear and bright. Once, she had thought the universe had abandoned them, but now she felt its light again. Daniel stood beside them, watching silently. The stars reflected in his weary eyes. For the first time, he did not feel alone under the endless sky. The cabin that had once been empty was no longer just a shelter. It was a place of warmth, of family, of something worth protecting. In a world broken by fear and silence, a fragile bond had been forged. Not of blood, but of choice. The choice of a man who refused to let hatred rule him, and the choice of a mother who never let go of hope. Together, they had created something new, not just survival, but the promise of a future. And as the fire burned through the night, the alien child slept peacefully, safe in the arms of two worlds brought together.